I never thought I'd see my sister speechless. But there she stood, mouth agape, designer purse sliding from her perfectly manicured fingers as our father's lawyer finished reading the will. Vanessa's face, usually composed and confident, had transformed into a mask of shock and disbelief. For the first time in her life, being the favorite child hadn't worked out in her favor. "This can't be right," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the hushed conference room. There must be some mistake. But there was no mistake. And as I sat there, watching the empire she thought she'd inherit crumble around her, I couldn't help but think about how we'd arrived at this moment, and how carefully I'd orchestrated every second of it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months earlier, I stood in the sterile hallway of Lakeside Community Hospital, my father's diagnosis still ringing in my ears. Terminal. 6 months at most. I pressed my forehead against the cool window overlooking the parking lot, watching as Vanessa's red Mercedes pulled away, taillights disappearing around the corner. She'd stayed exactly 17 minutes, just long enough to kiss Dad's forehead, ask if he needed anything from New York, and remind him that she had an important case waiting. Just long enough to maintain the appearance of the devoted daughter without actually devoting anything. I'd been there for 6 hours already. I would be there again tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day until the end. Just as I had been for the past 2 years as Dad's health slowly declined. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Alex. How's he doing?" my best friend asked, concern evident even through the phone. I sighed, turning away from the window. "Same. Doctors are adjusting his pain meds. Again." "And Hurricane Vanessa? I saw her Instagram post about visiting Daddy Dearest." I rolled my eyes. Blew in and out in under 20 minutes. Took a selfie holding his hand for social media before rushing back to her critically important merger deal. Alex's sigh mirrored my own. Classic Vanessa. Always has been. Always will be. He wasn't wrong. For as long as I could remember, Vanessa had been the star of the Mitchell family. 4 years older, infinitely more confident, and undeniably our father's favorite. Where I was practical, she was bold. Where I was reliable, she was exciting. Where I worked diligently at Mitchell Construction handling client relations and event planning, she pursued her glamorous legal career in New York, returning home only for holidays and photo opportunities. Yet somehow, despite her absence, she remained the golden child. She told Diane she's thinking of flying Dad to New York to see a specialist, I said, lowering my voice as a nurse walked past. Even though his doctors have explicitly said he's too weak for travel. "Let me guess, Diane thinks it's a wonderful idea?" Alex asked, referring to my stepmother. Of course. According to her, Vanessa's taking initiative while I'm being negative. After Mom died when I was 12, Dad had married Diane 3 years later. She had instantly bonded with Vanessa, both of them sharing a love for designer labels and social climbing. I was the awkward 15-year-old who preferred books to shopping sprees, and somehow that translated to being difficult in Diane's eyes. "Rebecca?" A nurse appeared in the doorway to Dad's room. "Your father's asking for you." I said goodbye to Alex and headed back in. Dad looked smaller somehow against the white hospital sheets, his once powerful frame diminished by illness. His construction company had built half of Lakeside's downtown, and he'd always been larger than life to me. Strong hands, booming laugh, unwavering confidence. Now, those hands trembled as he reached for mine. "Did Vanessa leave already?" he asked, his voice raspy. "She had to get back to work," I said gently, squeezing his hand. "Important case." He nodded, pride flickering across his tired face. My girl, making partner at 33. Incredible. I swallowed the hurt that rose in my throat. I'd put my own career advancement on hold when he first got sick, turning down a prestigious event planning position in Chicago to stay in Lakeside. But that sacrifice had never seemed incredible to him. I spoke to James today, Dad continued, referring to his business partner. Everything's on track for the transfer. My heart sank. The transfer. Dad had been preparing to hand over control of Mitchell Construction to Vanessa for months now, despite the fact that she knew nothing about construction, despite the fact that she hadn't worked a day at the company, despite the fact that I had dedicated the past 7 years of my life to it. That's great, Dad, I managed, the lie bitter on my tongue. He must have seen something in my expression because he frowned slightly. Becca, we've talked about this. Vanessa has the business acumen to take the company to the next level. What he meant was, Vanessa has the Harvard business degree that you don't. Never mind that I'd worked my way through state while Vanessa's education had been fully funded by Dad. Never mind that I knew every client, every project, every employee by name. I know, Dad, I said softly. I'm just worried about her running things from New York. He waved away my concern. She'll move back once everything's settled. She's already looking at houses in Oak Hill. My phone buzzed again. A text from Alex. Coffee tomorrow morning? Need to talk to you about something important. I texted back a quick confirmation before turning my attention back to Dad, who had drifted off to sleep, still holding my hand. I stayed that way for hours, watching his chest rise and fall, wondering how many more quiet moments we'd have together. The next morning, I met Alex at Riverfront Coffee Shop, our usual spot with a view of the water. Despite the serious reason for our meeting, I couldn't help but smile as I spotted him at our corner table, 2 steaming mugs already waiting. Alex Rivera had been my rock since college, first as the teaching assistant in my business ethics class, then as a friend, and now as the family's attorney. He'd joined Golden Oaks law offices 3 years ago, and when Dad needed to update his will last year, it had seemed natural to work with someone we trusted. You look terrible, he said as I slid into the seat across from him. Good morning. To you too, I replied, reaching for the coffee he'd ordered for me. Caramel latte, extra shot, just the way I liked it. Late night at the hospital? I nodded. Didn't get home until after 2. Dad was restless. I took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth and caffeine work their magic. So, what's this important thing we need to talk about? Alex leaned forward, his expression serious. Your father asked me to come by the hospital yesterday after you left for dinner. He wanted to discuss some changes to his will. I frowned. What kind of changes? He's considering adjusting the distribution of company shares. Alex hesitated. Currently, the will allocates 75% of Mitchell Construction to Vanessa and 25% to you. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter. I'd suspected as much, but hearing it, confirmed, still hurt. But, Alex continued, he's been thinking about your dedication these past couple of years. He mentioned possibly creating a more equitable split. Hope flickered briefly before reality extinguished it. Diane will never let that happen, I said. She's been in his ear about protecting Vanessa's inheritance since day one. Alex's expression shifted, and I knew him well enough to recognize the look that meant he was working through a legal puzzle. What? I asked. There might be a way, he said slowly, but it would require some strategic planning. I raised an eyebrow. Strategic planning? Your father values loyalty above all else, right? It's why he kept James as a partner, even when bigger companies tried to buy him out. I nodded, uncertain where he was going with this. What if, Alex said, leaning closer, we could show him the difference between your loyalty and Vanessa's? Lack thereof? We've been trying that for years, Alex. He doesn't see it. To him, Vanessa hung the moon. Because she's careful, About when and how she shows her true colors, Alex pointed out. She never lets him see her selfish side. But what if we created a situation where she had to choose between her own interests and his? I stared at him, a slow realization dawning. You want to set a trap for my sister? Alex shrugged. I prefer to think of it as creating an opportunity for her to reveal her true nature. I should have been appalled. I should have immediately rejected the idea. But after years of being overlooked, years of picking up Vanessa's slack, years of watching my father shower her with praise for the bare minimum while my sacrifices went unnoticed, something hardened within me. I'm listening, I said. Alex smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. It starts with you agreeing with Vanessa, for a change. Whatever she wants for your father, you support it. Make her think you finally accepted your place as second best. And then? Then, he said, we give her just enough rope to hang herself. As I drove to the hospital later that morning, Alex's words echoed in my mind. What he was suggesting felt manipulative, calculating, nothing like the person I thought I was. But then I thought about the company I'd helped build, the employees whose livelihoods would soon be in the hands of someone who cared more about her Instagram following than their families. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I thought about 7 years of early mornings and late nights, of learning the business from the ground up while Vanessa collected accolades for work I suspected her paralegals had done. Most of all, I thought about my father's face lighting, up whenever Vanessa called, while my daily presence had become expected, unremarkable. By the time I reached Dad's room, my decision was made. Vanessa was already there, surprisingly, perched on the edge of Dad's bed in a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Diane stood beside her, both of them looking up as I entered. There you are, Diane said, a hint of accusation in her tone. We were just discussing moving your father to a private facility in Manhattan. Vanessa has found an excellent place near her apartment. In the past, I would have immediately objected, listing all the reasons why moving Dad was a terrible idea. Today, I took a deep breath and nodded. That sounds wonderful, I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. I'm sure they have excellent care. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me in shock. You agree? Vanessa asked, suspicion evident in her narrowed gaze. I shrugged, setting my purse down. You've obviously done your research. If you think it's best for Dad, I trust your judgment. Dad reached for my hand, his expression concerned. Are you feeling all right, Becca? You've been so against the idea of moving me. I squeezed his fingers gently. I've been thinking about it, and Vanessa makes some good points. New York has world-class medical facilities, and this way, she can visit more often. Exactly, Vanessa said, recovering quickly, and there's an experimental treatment program that Dad might qualify for. Perfect, I smiled. When were you thinking of making the move? I've arranged for a medical transport next week, Vanessa said, still watching me cautiously. I'll need to head back to New York tomorrow to prepare everything, but I'll fly back for the transfer. As they discussed details, I caught the faintest smirk on Vanessa's lips. She thought she'd won. She thought I'd finally accepted my place in her shadow. If only she knew what was coming. That afternoon, as Vanessa headed to our childhood home to meet with Diane about the move, I followed through with the second part of Alex's plan. I called James Wilson, Dad's business partner of 30 years, and asked to meet him at the office. Mitchell Construction occupied a renovated warehouse downtown, the modern glass addition Dad had commissioned 5 years ago jutting impressively from the original brick structure. As I walked through the open concept main floor, employees greeted me warmly. Unlike Vanessa, who could barely name the department heads, I knew everyone, from Carlos in maintenance to Sophie at reception. James was waiting in the conference room, his weathered face creasing into a smile as I entered. "Rebecca," he stood to hug me. "How's Harold doing today?" "About the same," I said, settling into a chair across from him. "Actually, that's partly why I wanted to talk to you. James had been like an uncle to me growing up, teaching me how to read blueprints when I was still in pigtails. If anyone understood the injustice of Vanessa inheriting the company, it was him." "Vanessa's arranging to move Dad to New York," began, watching his bushy eyebrows shoot up in surprise. "Harold agreed to that?" I nodded. "He trusts her judgment. The problem is, she's also pushing to accelerate the leadership transition. She wants control of the company before Dad." I couldn't finish the sentence. James's expression darkened. That wasn't the plan. Harold wanted to maintain control until... He trailed off too, neither of us able to voice the inevitable. "I know," I said, "but she's convinced him it's for the best. She says she needs time to understand the operation before she's suddenly in charge." James snorted. "She should have thought of that 7 years ago when you started learning the business." He leaned forward. "What does she really want, Rebecca? Because we both know Vanessa doesn't make a move without an angle." This was the moment of truth. The next part of my plan required bringing James into our confidence, and I wasn't sure how he'd react. "There's a developer from Chicago who's been courting her," I said quietly. "Riverside Properties. They want to acquire Mitchell Construction, but they specifically want the Lakefront Commons project. The Lakefront Commons was our largest development to date, a mixed-use property on prime real estate that had been Dad's dream for a decade. We'd finally broken ground last year." James's face flushed with anger. "Over my dead body. That project is Harold's legacy." "I know," I said, "and Dad would never sell. But if Vanessa has control..." "She wouldn't dare. She's meeting with their representatives next week in New York. Unofficially, of course." James's hands clenched into fists on the table. "How did you find out?" "She accidentally forwarded me an email meant for her assistant. She doesn't know I know." This was the lie at the center of our plan. There was no developer, no secret meeting. But we needed James to believe there was, and more importantly, we needed him to tell Dad. "Harold needs to know," James said, already reaching for his phone. I placed my hand over his. "Not yet. If we tell him now, Vanessa will just deny it. We need proof." "What kind of proof?" "I need access to the Lakefront Commons files, the detailed projections, the investor list, everything that would be valuable to a potential buyer." James frowned. "You already have access to those." "Not the confidential investor agreements," I said. "Those are kept in Dad's private safe. I need you to authorize their release to me." This was the crucial moment. If James refused, the plan would fall apart before it began. He studied me, 30 years of business instincts clearly triggering warning bells. "What are you planning, Rebecca?" I met his gaze steadily. "I'm going to protect my father's company from my sister. Will you help me?" For a long moment, he said nothing. Then slowly, he nodded. "For Harold," he said. "And because you're the one who should be running this place anyway." As I left the office with the files tucked safely in my briefcase, I texted Alex. "Phase 1 complete." His response came immediately. "Time for Phase 2. How's your acting?" I smiled grimly. I'd been acting my whole life, pretending it didn't hurt when Dad praised Vanessa's accomplishments while overlooking mine, pretending Diane's subtle digs didn't land, pretending I was content with scraps of attention and approval. For once, my lifetime of pretending would serve a purpose beyond survival. It would finally bring me justice. Phase 2 began the next morning. I arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, knowing Vanessa would stop by before her flight back to New York. I was sitting by Dad's bed, deliberately reviewing the Lakefront Commons files when she breezed in. "Morning, Daddy," she sang, bending to kiss his cheek before acknowledging me with a nod. "Rebecca." "Hey, Ness," I said, using her childhood nickname as I hastily gathered the papers. "Didn't expect you so early." Her eyes flickered to the documents in my hands. "What are those?" I hesitated, just long enough to seem guilty. "Just some work stuff, nothing important." Dad, still groggy from his morning medication, smiled weakly. "Becca's been keeping everything running smoothly while I'm stuck in here. Don't know what I'd do without her." Something that might have been jealousy flashed across Vanessa's perfect features. "I'm sure she has," she said, setting her designer handbag down. "Actually, that reminds me. I was hoping to go over some company details before I head back. Maybe you could brief me." "Rebecca?" It was so predictable it almost made me laugh. One hint that I had information she didn't, and suddenly she was interested in the business she'd ignored for years. "Of course," I said, standing. "Dad, we'll just step outside for a few minutes, okay?" He waved us off, already drifting back to sleep. In the hallway, Vanessa's friendly facade instantly dropped. "What were those documents?" she demanded, her voice low but intense. I blinked, feigning surprise at her tone. "Just the Lakefront Commons projections. James asked me to review them since Dad's been too sick." "Let me see them." I clutched the folder closer. "They're confidential, Vanessa. Investor information. Profit projections. Dad's been very clear about keeping these private." Her eyes narrowed. "I'm taking over the company, Rebecca. I need to see everything." "Once Dad transfers control, absolutely," I said. "But until then, I have to respect his wishes." "Don't be ridiculous," she scoffed. "We both know it's just a matter of time. Besides, don't you think it would be helpful for me to understand the business better? Isn't that what you've always wanted?" The appeal to my longtime desire for her to take an interest in the company was clever. The old Rebecca would have jumped at the opportunity to finally share this part of her life with her sister. Instead, I hesitated. "I don't know, Ness. Dad's been so particular about these documents." "Tell you what," she said, her tone softening into the persuasive one she probably used on juries. "Let me make copies today, and I'll study them on the flight. It'll be our little secret. Dad will be impressed when I come back next week with some fresh insights." I pretended to consider this, then slowly nodded. "I guess that would be okay. But you can't show anyone else, especially not until Dad formally announces the succession plan." Relief flooded her features. "Of course not. I'll make copies at the house and get them back to you before my flight." I handed over the folder, watching as she tucked it into her expensive handbag. The bait had been taken. Now we just had to wait. "Thanks, Becca," she said, her tone almost genuine for once. "I know we don't always see eye to eye, but I do want to make Dad proud." The sincerity in her voice almost made me falter. Despite everything, she was still my sister. There had been a time, years ago, when I'd worshipped the ground she walked on, when her approval had meant everything. But then I remembered all the birthdays she'd missed, the graduation she'd skipped for a networking event, the countless times she'd taken credit for my work. I remembered how, when Mom died, she'd disappeared to boarding school while I was left to navigate my grief alone. "I know you do," I said, the lie coming easily. "We all want what's best for Dad." With a quick nod, she disappeared down the hallway, designer heels clicking on the linoleum, the future of Mitchell Construction tucked carelessly under her arm. I pulled out my phone and sent another text to Alex. "Fish on the hook." His reply, "Time to set the trap." The next part of our plan hinged on Vanessa's predictability. We knew she wouldn't be able to resist showing those documents to someone who could help her understand their value. Specifically, someone from a competing, development firm. What she didn't know was that Alex had prepared 2 sets of the Lakefront Commons files. The ones she now possessed contained subtly altered information: inflated profit projections, understated costs, and a fictional investor named Richardson Holdings, with a substantial stake in the project. Richardson Holdings was actually a shell company Alex had created yesterday, with a website, LinkedIn profile, and fake contact information that would lead directly to a burner phone in his possession. If Vanessa tried to reach out to this investor or shared the information with anyone else, we would know. I returned to Dad's room to find him more alert, watching a baseball game on the small TV mounted on the wall. "Where's your sister?" he asked as I settled back into the chair beside him. "She had to make some calls before her flight," I said. "She'll be back to say goodbye before she leaves." Dad nodded, his attention returning to the game. A comfortable silence fell between us, broken only by the quiet commentary from the TV and the steady beep of the monitors. I found myself studying his face, memorizing the lines around his eyes, the shape of his hands that had taught me how to hold a hammer, to drive a car, to stand up for myself. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Opening it, I found a message from Olivia Chen, my colleague at Mitchell Construction who handled our marketing. "Need to talk ASAP. Vanessa just called asking about lakefront pricing strategy. Said you approved the disclosure. Call me." I excused myself to make the call in the hallway. "Olivia, it's Becca. What did Vanessa want exactly?" "She was asking about our competitive pricing strategy for the commercial units," Olivia said, concern evident in her voice. She mentioned comparing them to similar developments in Chicago. I thought it was odd since she's never shown interest in marketing before. "Did you tell her anything?" "No, I said I needed to check with you first. But Becca, why is she suddenly interested in Chicago comparables?" "I'm not sure," I said, though of course I knew exactly why. "But I'm glad you checked with me. Don't share anything with her for now, okay? Dad's still technically in charge, and he hasn't authorized any disclosure." After hanging up, I immediately called Alex to update him. "She's making her move faster than we expected," he said. "This is good. The more people she contacts, the more evidence we have." "What's our next step?" "I've already seeded information about Richardson Holdings in industry circles," Alex explained. "If she does any digging, she'll find mentions of a major investor looking to expand their Chicago portfolio into Michigan. The trap is set." Over the next few days, we monitored Vanessa's activities from afar. She had returned to New York as planned, but according to our network of informants, Olivia in marketing, Carlos in maintenance, who had a cousin working for a competing firm, and Sophie at reception, who tracked all incoming calls, Vanessa had been making inquiries all over town. She'd contacted 3 other developers, supposedly to understand market trends. She'd requested detailed financial records from our accounting department. She'd even called Uncle Peter, Dad's brother and a minor stakeholder in the company, to ask about buyout procedures. Each piece of evidence was carefully documented by Alex and added to a file we were building. But we still needed the smoking gun, proof that she was actively planning to sell Dad's legacy project. It came on Friday, 4 days after Vanessa had left with the falsified documents. I was having lunch with James in the hospital cafeteria when my phone rang. It was the burner number Alex had set up for the fictional Richardson Holdings. "Hello?" I answered, putting it on speaker so James could hear. "Is this Mr. Richardson?" asked a familiar voice, my sister's. I deepened my voice slightly. "This is his assistant. Mr. Richardson is unavailable. Who's calling, please?" "This is Vanessa Mitchell from Mitchell Construction. I wanted to discuss our Lakefront Commons development and some potential opportunities." James's eyes widened as he listened, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. "I see," I said in my disguised voice. "And what kind of opportunities are you referring to?" Vanessa's voice took on the smooth, persuasive tone she used in court. We're considering strategic partnerships, possibly even acquisition offers, for this particular development. According to our records, Richardson Holdings has a significant interest in the project, and we wanted to discuss future directions. I wasn't aware Mitchell Construction was for sale, I said. It's not, at least not entirely, Vanessa replied smoothly. But this particular asset might be available to the right partner. I'm authorized to begin preliminary discussions. James's face had turned a dangerous shade of red. I held up a finger, silently urging him to stay quiet. Who exactly has authorized these discussions, Ms. Mitchell? I asked. I'm the incoming CEO, she said confidently. The transition is happening next week. I have full authority to explore these options. I see. Well, I'll pass this message to Mr. Richardson. He may be interested in continuing this conversation. Would next Tuesday work for a meeting? Perhaps at your New York office. That would be perfect, Vanessa said, not bothering to hide her enthusiasm. I'll email you the address. After ending the call, James slammed his fist on the table, causing several nearby diners to stare. That snake, he hissed. Harold's not even gone yet, and she's already selling off his dream project. We need to tell Dad, I said quietly. Today. James nodded grimly. I'll bring the original files. He needs to see exactly what she's planning. We found Dad dozing in his room, looking frailer than ever against the hospital pillows. A wave of guilt washed over me as James gently shook him awake. Was this too much stress for him in his condition? But when James explained why we were there, something remarkable happened. Dad's eyes cleared, his spine straightened, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of the formidable businessman he'd once been. Show me everything, he commanded, his voice stronger than I'd heard in weeks. For the next hour, we laid out all the evidence. The calls to competitors, the requests for financial information, the conversation with the fictional Richardson Holdings. Dad listened silently, his expression growing darker with each revelation. She always was ambitious, he said finally, his voice tired but resolute. But I never thought she'd sell out the family legacy. What do you want to do, Harold? James asked gently. Dad looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. Becca, you've been running things anyway, haven't you? Behind the scenes. I hesitated, then nodded. Someone had to. A flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossed his features. I've been blind, he said softly. Too caught up in Vanessa's accomplishments to see what was right in front of me. He turned to James. Call Alex. I need to make some changes to my will. My heart skipped a beat. Dad, are you sure? You don't have to do anything drastic. He reached for my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. It's not drastic, Becca. It's just finally doing what I should have done a long time ago. As Alex was summoned to the hospital, Dad asked to speak with me alone. James stepped out, leaving us in a rare moment of privacy. I've always known you were the reliable one, Dad began, his words careful. The one who would always be there, I think. I think I took that for granted. Tears pricked at my eyes. This was the closest he'd ever come to acknowledging the imbalance that had defined our family. It's okay, Dad, I said, though we both knew it wasn't. No, it's not, he replied, surprising me with his directness. I favored your sister because she reminded me of myself. Ambitious, driven, always reaching for more. You reminded me of your mother. Steady, loyal, kind. He paused, his breathing slightly labored. After she died, it hurt to see her in you. So I focused on Vanessa instead. It was easier. The admission hit me like a physical blow. All these years I'd thought there was something lacking in me, some fundamental flaw that made me less worthy of his attention. I didn't know, I whispered. I should have told you, he said simply. I should have told you a lot of things. When Alex arrived an hour later, Dad was ready. He dictated the changes to his will with a clarity and precision that belied his physical condition, leaving no doubt about his intentions. I tried to protest when I heard the extent of the changes, but Dad was adamant. "This is my decision, Rebecca, my company, my legacy, and I'm finally putting it in the right hands." Alex drafted the amendments on his laptop, printed them using the hospital's business center, and returned with witnesses, a hospital administrator and a chaplain, both of whom had no connection to our family. As Dad signed the documents with a steady hand, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Vindication, yes, but also sadness that it had taken such extreme circumstances to bring us to this point. Alex promised to file the updated will immediately, ensuring it would be legally binding before Vanessa returned. "She won't be able to contest this, Harold," he assured my father. "You're of sound mind, and we have multiple witnesses." Dad nodded, then turned to me. "Now for the harder part. We need to confront Vanessa." "I'll call her," I offered. "No," Dad said firmly. "Let her come back thinking everything is proceeding as planned. Let her walk into the room believing she's won." His eyes held a steely determination I hadn't seen since before his illness. It's time my oldest daughter learned that actions have consequences. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Dad's condition remained stable, but the atmosphere in his hospital room had shifted. There was a new tension, a sense of waiting. Diane had noticed the change immediately when she visited. "What's going on?" she demanded, looking between Dad and me. "You two seem different." Dad had simply smiled. "Just some business decisions, dear. Nothing for you to worry about." She hadn't believed him. I could tell by the suspicious glances she kept throwing my way, but she hadn't pressed further. Instead, she focused on preparations for Dad's transfer to New York, scheduled for Monday. "Vanessa's found the most exclusive facility," she gushed, showing Dad brochures of a place that looked more like a luxury hotel than a hospital. "Private chefs, daily physical therapy, views of Central Park." Dad had nodded politely, but I noticed he never actually agreed to the move. When Diane left, he turned to me with a wink. "Seems a shame to waste all her planning." I laughed, surprised by this glimpse of mischief from my usually serious father. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "Let's just say I'm looking forward to Monday." Monday arrived with a flurry of activity. Vanessa's flight was due to land at 10 a.m. and she would come directly to the hospital to oversee Dad's transfer. The medical transport was scheduled for 2 p.m., or at least that's what Vanessa and Diane believed. In reality, Alex had arranged for the hospital's administrative team to discover a problem with the transfer paperwork around 11 a.m., delaying everything by at least 3 hours. This would give us the time we needed for the confrontation. I arrived at the hospital early, bringing Dad his favorite coffee from the local shop and a fresh blueberry muffin. "Nervous?" I asked, setting up his breakfast. "Not at all," he replied, though the slight tremble in his hands betrayed him. "I've faced tougher opponents than my own daughter in business, but we both knew this wasn't just business. This was family, with all the complicated emotions that entailed." Around 11:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Picking up Vanessa now. Be there in 20. Everything ready?" I showed Dad the message. "Showtime soon." He nodded, then surprised me by reaching for my hand. "Whatever happens, Becca, I want you to know I'm proud of you. Not just for catching Vanessa's scheme, but for everything you've done all these years without recognition." The unexpected praise brought a lump to my throat. "Thanks, Dad." "I mean it," he insisted. "You're your mother's daughter, but you're also mine. You've got her heart and my business sense, a better combination than I realized." Before I could respond, the door swung open, and there she was. Vanessa, immaculate as always in a tailored navy suit, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, diamond studs glinting at her ears. "Daddy!" she exclaimed, rushing to embrace him while barely acknowledging my presence. "You look so much better already. Just wait until you see the facility in New York. It's going to be perfect." Diane followed close behind, nodding approvingly. "The car service will be here at 2, and the medical transport is all arranged." I caught Dad's eye across the room, seeing the same thought reflected there. They had no idea what was coming. "Actually," Dad said, his voice remarkably steady, "there's been a slight change of plans." Vanessa paused in the middle of unpacking a gift bag she'd brought. "What do you mean? I'm not going to New York." The statement hung in the air for a moment before Diane let out a nervous laugh. "Harold, don't be silly. Everything's arranged. Vanessa's gone to so much trouble." "I'm sure she has," Dad replied, his tone hardening slightly. "Vanessa's always been very thorough in her planning." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing something off in his tone. "Dad, what's going on? Has Rebecca been filling your head with reasons to stay? Because I promise you, the care in New York will be superior." "This isn't about medical care," Dad interrupted. "This is about Mitchell construction." A flicker of something, uncertainty, fear, crossed Vanessa's perfect features before she composed herself. "What about it?" "Everything's on track for the transition, just like we discussed." Dad leaned forward in his bed. "Is that why you've been contacting our competitors? Why you've been inquiring about selling Lakefront Commons? Part of our transition plan?" Vanessa went very still, her gaze darting briefly to me before returning to Dad. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," Dad said, his voice quiet but intense. "We have the recordings, Vanessa. We have the emails. We know exactly what you've been planning." Vanessa's composure cracked just slightly. "Whatever Rebecca's told you—" "This isn't about Rebecca," Dad cut in. "This is about you trying to sell off my life's work before I'm even gone." Diane stepped forward, her hand on Vanessa's arm. "Harold, you're confused. The medication—" "I'm not confused, Diane. I'm finally seeing clearly." Dad's voice was gathering strength now. "Vanessa has been planning to sell Lakefront Commons to Riverside Properties the moment she gained control of the company." "That's not—" Vanessa began, but stopped when Dad held up his hand. "Richardson Holdings," he said simply. The color drained from Vanessa's face. "Ring a bell?" Dad continued. "The investor you called on Friday? To discuss strategic partnerships?" Vanessa's eyes darted around the room as she visibly recalculated her position. "Daddy, you don't understand. I was exploring options to maximize value. That's what good business leaders do." "No," Dad said firmly. "Good business leaders honor commitments. They protect legacies. They don't sell out family traditions for quick profits." The room fell silent as Vanessa seemed to realize the depth of the trap she'd fallen into. Finally, her gaze settled on me, hardening into accusation. "You did this," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You set me up." I met her stare evenly. "You did this to yourself, Vanessa. All I did was give you the opportunity to show Dad who you really are." "You little—" She took a step toward me but was stopped by Dad's voice, stronger than I'd heard in months. "Enough," he commanded. "Vanessa, sit down. We're not finished." Surprisingly, she obeyed, sinking into the chair opposite his bed. "I've amended my will," Dad announced, causing both Vanessa and Diane to gasp. "Mitchell Construction will no longer be passing to you, Vanessa. Effective immediately, Rebecca will be taking over as CEO, with James remaining as COO." "You can't do that," Vanessa whispered, shock evident in her voice. "I can, and I have," Dad replied calmly. "The paperwork was filed on Friday." Diane's face had flushed an angry red. "This is Rebecca's doing," she accused. "She's manipulated." "You, Harold, she's always been jealous of Vanessa." Dad shook his head. No, Diane, this is my decision, based on evidence, not emotion. Vanessa stood suddenly, her designer handbag clutched like a shield. You'll regret this, she said, her voice trembling with rage. Both of you. As she stormed toward the door, Dad called after her. Vanessa. She paused, not turning. You're still my daughter, he said quietly. That hasn't changed, but Mitchell Construction needs someone who values what it stands for, not just what it's worth. For a moment, I thought I saw her shoulders slump, a glimpse of the little girl who used to trail after Dad on construction sites, begging to wear his hard hat. But then she straightened, chin lifting in defiance, and walked out without another word. Diane lingered, torn between following Vanessa and staying to change Dad's mind. You should go with her, Dad suggested gently. She'll need someone. With one last glare in my direction, Diane hurried after my sister, the door closing behind her with a decisive click. Dad exhaled slowly, sinking back against his pillows. Well, he said, reaching for my hand. That went about as expected. I squeezed his fingers. Are you okay? He nodded, though the confrontation had clearly drained him. Better than okay. For the first time in years, I feel like I've done the right thing. I studied his face, seeing the fatigue but also a certain peace that hadn't been there before. No regrets? About the company? None. He paused, his gaze drifting to the door where Vanessa had disappeared. About other things. Many. But that's the nature of fatherhood, I suppose. You do your best with what you know at the time. We sat in companionable silence for a while, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the hospital room. Finally, Dad spoke again. You know she won't accept this easily, he warned. Vanessa has never taken defeat gracefully. I nodded, already anticipating the battles to come. I know, but we'll face that when it happens. That's my girl, Dad said softly, his eyes drifting closed. Always ready for what comes next. As he dozed, I sent a quick text to Alex. It's done. She knows. His reply came moments later. How did she take it? I glanced at my sleeping father, thinking of all the years it had taken to reach this point, all the pain and disappointment that had led us here. About how you'd expect, I texted back. But Dad stood his ground. It's official now. I set down my phone and gazed out. The window at the lakeside skyline, dotted with buildings my father had constructed, projects I had helped bring to life. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what it would be like to lead Mitchell Construction, to build something that was truly mine. It wouldn't be easy. Vanessa would fight. Diane would undermine. There would be employees loyal to the old guard, investors nervous about the change in leadership, competitors eager to capitalize on the family drama. But as I watched my father sleep, his face peaceful in a way it hadn't been in years, I knew we had done the right thing. Not just, for the company, but for him. For his legacy. My phone lit up with another message from Alex. Congratulations, CEO Mitchell. Ready for what comes next? I smiled, typing back a single word. Always. By Wednesday afternoon, the hospital had settled into an uneasy calm. Vanessa had not returned after storming out, though Diane had made several brief visits, her conversation strained and formal. Dad seemed both relieved and saddened by the distance, but he remained firm in his decision about the company. The transfer paperwork should be finalized by Friday, Alex told me as we shared lunch in the hospital cafeteria. James is handling the executive team notification. By Monday morning, you'll officially be CEO. I pushed my salad around the damper. Plastic container, appetite diminished by the weight of what lay ahead. It still doesn't feel real. Having second thoughts? Alex asked, studying my face. Not about the company, I clarified quickly. I know I can do the job. It's Vanessa. The look on her face when Dad told her? I've never seen her so betrayed. Alex's expression softened. You didn't betray her, Becca. She betrayed your father's trust. There's a difference. I know that logically, but she's still my sister. I sighed, setting down my fork. And now I've driven this permanent wedge between us. The wedge was already there, Alex reminded me gently. You just stopped pretending it wasn't. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a call from Uncle Peter. I excused myself to answer, stepping into the hallway. Rebecca, my uncle's gruff voice came through the line. Is it true? Harold's cutting Vanessa out? The news had traveled fast. Not cutting her out completely, I explained. She's still getting a significant inheritance. But yes, I'm taking over the company. A low whistle. Can't say I'm surprised. That girl never did have Harold's work ethic, but I am surprised he finally saw it. Did Vanessa call you? I asked, wondering how he'd found out. Showed up at my doorstep last night, tears streaming down her face. Said you'd manipulated Harold into changing his will, that you'd planted false evidence. My stomach clenched. That's not what happened. I know that, Uncle Peter assured me. Vanessa's always been dramatic. Remember when she claimed you stole her prom date? I winced at the memory. Jason Hartley had asked me to prom first, but Vanessa had convinced everyone that I'd somehow schemed to take him away from her. The fact that she'd never even spoken to Jason before was irrelevant in her version of events. What did you tell her? I asked. That she'd made her bed and would have to lie in it. Wasn't particularly sympathetic, I'm afraid. Uncle Peter's voice took on a more serious tone. But that's not why I'm calling. She mentioned something about contesting the will, getting her lawyer friends involved. My grip tightened on the phone. Can she do that? She can try. Won't get far with Harold still alive and clearly of sound mind, but she could make things messy. Just wanted to give you a heads up. After thanking him for the warning, I returned to the table where Alex was waiting expectantly. Uncle Peter says Vanessa's talking about contesting the will, I told him, getting lawyers involved. Alex didn't seem particularly concerned. She can try, but as long as your dad is legally competent, which he absolutely is, her case won't stand. Even if something happened to him now, we have overwhelming evidence of her plans to sell the company, which directly contradicts Harold's wishes. So we're covered legally. Completely. He hesitated. But that doesn't mean she won't try other tactics. Like what? Turning family against you, spreading rumors among employees, classic divide and conquer strategy. I thought about the Mitchell construction employees, many of whom had known me since I was a child bringing Dad lunch at job sites. She doesn't know them like I do. Maybe not, Alex acknowledged, but she knows how to manipulate people. Don't underestimate her. The warning proved prescient the very next morning. I arrived at the office to find a buzz of whispered conversations that fell silent as I walked through. Sophie at reception wouldn't quite meet my eyes as she handed me my messages. Is everything okay? I asked her, keeping my voice casual. She fidgeted with her pen. Ms. Mitchell, your sister, sent an email to the whole company last night about the transition. My heart sank. What did it say? Sophie hesitated, then reached into her drawer and handed me a printed copy. The email was masterfully crafted, Vanessa's legal training on full display. It expressed deep concern about the unexpected disruption to the succession plan, hinting at undue influence during a vulnerable time for our family. She assured employees that she was working to resolve the situation and asked for their patience during this difficult period. The most telling line came near the end. While I understand this creates uncertainty for you all, please know that I remain committed to preserving Mitchell Construction as my father built it, rather than allowing hasty changes that might put your jobs and our legacy at risk. The implication was clear. I was a threat to their job security, a risky change, a danger to the company's future. "Thanks, Sophie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I handed the email back. "Has James seen this?" She nodded. "He called an emergency executive meeting for 9 o'clock. James was already in the conference room when I arrived, along with our CFO, HR director, and 3 vice presidents. Their expressions ranged from concerned to openly skeptical. "Good morning," I said, taking the seat at the head of the table. That had always been my father's. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. "Rebecca," James began, his tone formal. "I think we need to address the elephant in the room." I nodded, straightening my shoulders. "Vanessa's email. I've seen it." "It's caused some concern," our HR director, Patricia, said carefully. "Several department heads have already contacted me asking for clarification." "I understand," I said, "and I appreciate the opportunity to set the record straight." For the next 20 minutes, I laid out the facts as plainly as possible. I explained Vanessa's plans to sell Lakefront Commons, showed them the recordings of her calls to competitors, and shared Dad's decision to change the succession plan based on this evidence. "My father built this company to last generations," I concluded. "He chose me to lead it because he believes I share that vision. My commitment is to all of you, to our clients, and to the communities we build, not to selling off assets for short-term gain." The room was silent when I finished. Finally, our CFO, Marshall, spoke up. "I worked with your father for 15 years, he said slowly. "Harold Mitchell is many things, but easily manipulated. Isn't one of them. If he chose you, he had his reasons." Murmurs of agreement followed his statement. James caught my eye across the table, giving me an approving nod. "So what's our response?" Patricia asked. "Do we send out a company-wide email countering Vanessa's claims?" I considered this, then shook my head. "No. That would just escalate things, make it look like a public family feud. Instead, I want each of you to speak directly with your teams. Answer questions honestly. Reassure them that Mitchell Construction remains committed to the same values it always has." "And what about Vanessa?" Marshall asked. "Do we expect further interventions?" "Probably," I admitted. "But we'll handle those as they come. For now, our focus is on stability and transparency." As the meeting concluded, James lingered behind. "Well handled," he said once we were alone. "Your father would be proud." "Thanks," I said, though the victory felt hollow. "I just wish it hadn't come to this." "Unfortunately, this is only the beginning," James warned. "Vanessa's never been one to surrender gracefully." His prediction proved accurate throughout the day. By noon, I'd received reports that Vanessa had contacted several of our major clients expressing concerns about the leadership transition. By 3 o'clock, I learned she'd reached out to 2 board members, suggesting an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. And by 5, when I was preparing to leave for the hospital, Alex called with the most troubling news yet. "Vanessa's filed for an emergency competency hearing," he said without preamble. "She's claiming Harold was under undue influence due to medication when he changed the will." I sank into my chair, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. "Can she do that?" "She can try," Alex said grimly. "She's found a sympathetic judge, Martin Geller. They apparently worked on a charity committee together." "What does this mean?" "It means we need to get your father's doctors to certify his mental competence immediately, and we need to prepare him for potential questioning." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. "This will kill him, Alex. The stress of a legal battle with his own daughter." "I know," he said softly. "But we don't have a choice. Vanessa's playing hardball." When I arrived at the hospital an hour later, I was surprised to find Diane sitting with Dad, her expression tense but not overtly hostile. She stood when I entered, gathering her designer purse. "I'll leave you two to talk," she said stiffly. As she passed me in the doorway, she paused. For what it's worth, I tried to talk her out of the legal action. She wouldn't listen. The admission stunned me into silence, and Diane was gone before I could respond. Dad looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than ever. "Diane told me about the hearing," he said as I took the seat she'd vacated. "I'm sorry," I said, reaching for his hand. "This isn't what I wanted." "I know, Becca." He squeezed my fingers. "But it's what Vanessa wants, and she's never been one to accept defeat." "We can fight it," I assured him. "Alex says your doctors can testify to your mental competence. The hearing will be dismissed." Dad nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "It's not the hearing that concerns me. It's what this reveals about your sister, that she would go this far." His voice trailed off, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before: disillusionment. For all the years of favoring Vanessa, of overlooking her flaws, he'd maintained a certain image of her, his ambitious, brilliant firstborn. Now, that image was crumbling, and the pain of that realization was written plainly on his face. "I failed her," he said softly. "Somewhere along the way, I taught her that getting what she wants is more important than how she gets it." "You can't blame yourself," I said, though part of me had spent years doing exactly that. "Vanessa makes her own choices, influenced by the values I instilled or failed to instill." He sighed, looking older than his 68 years. "When your mother was alive, she balanced me out. She saw Vanessa's tendencies toward entitlement and tried to correct them. After she died, I just wanted both of you to be happy. For Vanessa, that meant giving her everything she wanted. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had about the family dynamics that had shaped my childhood. Part of me wanted to push further, to finally voice the hurt I'd carried for so long. But looking at my father's weary face, I couldn't bring myself to add to his burden. "What do you want to do about the hearing?" I asked instead. Dad straightened in his bed, some of his old determination returning. "We fight it, of course. I'm not incompetent, and I won't let Vanessa or anyone else claim I am." The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Alex arrived with Dad's neurologist, Dr. Chen, who conducted a thorough cognitive assessment. Dad scored perfectly, showing no signs of confusion or impairment. "I'll include these results in my affidavit," Dr. Chen promised. "There's absolutely no medical basis for questioning Mr. Mitchell's decision-making capacity." The hospital administrator also agreed to provide records showing Dad had been on minimal pain medication when he signed the updated will, far below any dose that would affect cognition. By afternoon, Alex had compiled a comprehensive response to Vanessa's filing, complete with medical records, witness statements, and transcripts of Vanessa's incriminating calls to competitors. "This should be enough to get the hearing dismissed," he told me as we reviewed the documents in Dad's room. "Judge Geller may be sympathetic to Vanessa, but he can't ignore objective medical evidence." Dad, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up. "I want to talk to her." Alex and I exchanged concerned glances. "Dad, I'm not sure that's a good idea right now," I said carefully. "Her lawyers would probably advise against it anyway." "Not a legal discussion," Dad clarified. "A father-daughter conversation. One final chance to resolve this without courtrooms. And judges." "Harold," Alex began hesitantly, "from a legal perspective—" "I'm not asking for legal advice," Dad interrupted, his tone firmer than I'd heard in weeks. "I'm telling you what I need to do as a father. Please arrange it." Alex looked to me, clearly hoping I'd talk Dad out of it, but I recognized the determination in my father's eyes, the same look he'd had when negotiating difficult contracts or navigating building permit obstacles. "I'll call her," I said finally, "but I can't promise she'll come." To my surprise, Vanessa agreed almost immediately, to meet with Dad the following morning. What I hadn't expected was that she'd bring reinforcements, specifically her colleague Gabriel Reynolds, one of New York's most aggressive estate litigators. This wasn't the agreement, I protested when they arrived together. Dad wanted to speak with you privately. And I want protection from further manipulation, Vanessa replied coolly. Gabriel stays, or I leave. Dad, who had been watching this exchange from his hospital bed, spoke up. It's fine, Becca. Mr. Reynolds can stay. He turned to Vanessa's lawyer. But understand that this is a family conversation, not a deposition. Reynolds, a thin man with sharp features and expensive cufflinks, nodded stiffly. Of course, Mr. Mitchell. I'm here purely as an observer. Then observe from the corner, Dad said, gesturing to a chair in the far side of the room. Vanessa, sit here. He patted the edge of his bed. For a moment, I thought Vanessa would refuse. She stood rigid in the doorway, her designer suit a stark contrast to the clinical hospital setting. Then, slowly, she crossed to Dad's bed and perched on the edge, her spine straight as a ruler. Would you like me to leave? I asked Dad quietly. He shook his head. Stay. This concerns both of you. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Dad studied Vanessa's face, his expression a mixture of sadness and resolution. Why are you doing this? He finally asked her, his voice gentle, but direct. Vanessa blinked, clearly expecting a different opening. Doing what? The competency hearing, the legal maneuvers. Why fight me on this? She straightened even further, if that was possible. Because you're not thinking clearly. Because Rebecca has taken advantage of your condition to manipulate you into changing your will. That's your legal argument, Dad acknowledged. I'm asking for the truth, Vanessa. As your father, not as the CEO of Mitchell Construction. Something flickered in Vanessa's eyes. Vulnerability, perhaps, or uncertainty. You promised me the company, she said, her voice slightly less steady. All my life, you told me I would take over someday, that I would be your legacy. And you were planning to sell off Lakefront Commons the moment you gained control, Dad countered. How does that honor my legacy? Vanessa's jaw tightened. Business evolves, Dad. Sometimes strategic divestment is the smartest path forward. Without even consulting me? Without honoring the vision I've had for that project for a decade? You were sick, she said defensively. I was being practical. You were being opportunistic, Dad corrected, though without heat. The question is why? You've never needed money. I've provided generously for both of you. Your law career is thriving. Why sell off the cornerstone of our family business? Vanessa's composure slipped slightly, her perfectly manicured fingers fidgeting with the edge of Dad's blanket. It's not about the money. Then what is it about? She hesitated, glancing briefly at Reynolds in the corner before turning back to Dad. Freedom, she admitted quietly. I never wanted to run a construction company in Michigan. I built my life in New York. My career, my friends, everything is there. Then why not simply decline the position? I asked, unable to hold back. Why pretend you wanted it all these years? Vanessa shot me a cold look. Because it was important. To Dad. Because it was what he expected of me. Dad's expression softened. Is that true? You accepted the company out of obligation. Not exactly, Vanessa hedged. I wanted what it represented. Your approval, your legacy. But the actual running of Mitchell Construction, the day-to-day operations in Lakeside? No, that was never my dream. So, you were going to sell Lakefront Commons, then what? Dad pressed. Slowly dismantle the entire company? Vanessa didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. Dad sighed deeply, reaching for her hand. Ness, he said, using her childhood nickname. If you'd just been honest with me from the beginning, we could have avoided all of this. Would we? She challenged, withdrawing her hand. Would you have accepted that your golden child didn't want the future you'd planned for her? That she preferred her life in New York to carrying on the Mitchell legacy? The question hung in the air, heavy with decades of expectations and unspoken truths. Dad was silent for a long moment, his gaze shifting between Vanessa and me. I would have been disappointed, he finally acknowledged, but I would have respected your honesty more than this deception. Vanessa's eyes glistened suddenly. You never gave me the choice, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was always, when Vanessa takes over, and Vanessa's going to lead the company to new heights. How could I tell you I didn't want that future when it clearly meant so much to you? For perhaps the first time in my life, I felt a flicker of sympathy for my sister. Behind her perfect facade, she'd been trapped by the same paternal expectations that had excluded me, just from the opposite direction. Dad reached for her hand again, and this time, she didn't pull away. I'm sorry, he said simply. I put my dreams onto you without asking if they were your dreams too. Vanessa swallowed hard, a single tear escaping despite her obvious effort to maintain composure. So what happens now? That depends on you, Dad said. Are you willing to drop this legal challenge? To accept that Rebecca is better suited to lead Mitchell Construction, not because I love her more, but because she truly wants to? Vanessa was quiet for a long time, her internal struggle evident on her face. Finally, she looked up, her gaze moving from Dad to me. You'll keep Lakefront Commons intact? She asked me directly. You won't sell it? I would never sell it, I assured her. It's Dad's legacy project, our legacy. She nodded slowly, then turned back to Dad. And what about my inheritance? The rest of the estate? Dad's expression hardened slightly. This isn't a negotiation, Vanessa. This is me asking you to do the right thing. Reynolds cleared his throat from the corner. Perhaps we should discuss the estate division privately, Ms. Mitchell. No, Vanessa said firmly, surprising everyone. Dad's right. This isn't about money. She took a deep breath. I'll withdraw the competency challenge. Relief washed over Dad's face. Thank you, Ness. But, she continued, her lawyer instincts resurfacing, I want it on record that I'm doing this voluntarily, not because the challenge lacks merit. Of course, Alex said from the doorway, where he'd been waiting. We can draft a statement, acknowledging your voluntary withdrawal. With the immediate crisis averted, Reynolds excused himself to make calls, and Alex followed to draft the necessary paperwork. Dad looked exhausted but relieved, the emotional conversation clearly having taken a toll. I'm proud of you, he told Vanessa. This couldn't have been easy. She managed a small smile, though her eyes remained sad. It's what Mom would have wanted. She always said family was more important than pride. Dad's eyes misted at the mention of our mother. She was right about so many things. As I watched them together, Dad and his firstborn, sharing a moment of genuine connection perhaps for the first time in years, I felt like an intruder. I moved toward the door, intending to give them privacy. Becca, Vanessa called, stopping. Me. Wait. I turned, surprised by the lack of hostility in her voice. I owe you an apology, she said, the words clearly difficult for her. Not for fighting for what I thought was mine, but for other things, over the years. The vague apology was so typically Vanessa, acknowledging wrongdoing without specifying exactly what she was sorry for. But it was more than I'd ever expected to receive from her. Thank you, I said simply. That means a lot. An awkward silence fell, neither of us quite sure how to navigate this unfamiliar territory of tentative reconciliation. Maybe, Dad suggested gently. Once all this legal business is settled, we could have dinner together. The three of us. Like old times. Vanessa and I exchanged glances, both remembering that old times had rarely involved peaceful family dinners. I'd like that, I said anyway, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. Vanessa nodded. Me too. She stood, smoothing her skirt. I should go help Gabriel with the paperwork. I'll come back later? Dad smiled. I'll be here. After she left, Dad leaned back against his pillows, suddenly looking every one of his years. That went better than I expected. Do you think she means it? I asked, unable to completely trust Vanessa's sudden capitulation. Or is this another tactic? I think she's sincere, Dad said after a moment's consideration. Vanessa has many faults, but when she gives her word, she keeps it. She's like me that way. I wasn't entirely convinced, but I kept my doubts to myself. Dad needed to believe in this reconciliation, needed to think his family might heal before. I pushed away the thought. You should rest, I told him, adjusting his pillows. It's been an emotional morning. He caught my hand. You're going to be an excellent CEO, Becca. Better than I was, probably. I shook my head. Not possible. Yes, possible. His grip tightened slightly. You have your mother's compassion along with my business sense. That's a powerful combination. The compliment, so similar to what he'd said days earlier, yet somehow more meaningful now, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Thank you, Dad. He nodded, his eyelids already growing heavy. Wake me if Vanessa comes back with the papers. As promised, Vanessa returned that afternoon with the signed withdrawal of her legal challenge. The document was straightforward, acknowledging that she was voluntarily dismissing her petition regarding Dad's competency. Alex looked it over, she told Dad, handing him the papers. He says it's all in order. Dad reviewed the document briefly before signing. Thank you, Vanessa. I know this wasn't an easy decision. She shrugged, attempting nonchalance, though the tension in her shoulders betrayed her discomfort. It was the right decision. That's what matters. The three of us fell into an awkward conversation, Vanessa sharing updates about her law firm, Dad asking questions about her cases, me contributing occasional comments while watching for any signs that this newfound peace was merely a facade. When a nurse came in to check Dad's vitals, Vanessa used the interruption as an opportunity to leave. I should get going. I have some calls to make before dinner. Will you come back tomorrow? Dad asked, a hint of vulnerability in his question. Vanessa hesitated, then nodded. Of course. Maybe around lunch? After she left, I found myself oddly unsettled by the entire interaction. Something about Vanessa's cooperation felt too easy, too sudden. The sister I knew was tenacious, relentless when pursuing something she wanted. You're overthinking this, Alex told me when I expressed my concerns over coffee that evening. Vanessa realized she was outmaneuvered. She's cutting her losses and salvaging what relationship she can with your father. Maybe, I conceded, but it just doesn't feel like her. People can surprise you, he reminded me, especially when they're forced to confront the consequences of their actions. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that Vanessa had genuinely accepted Dad's decision, that we might actually find some kind of peace as a family in Dad's final months. But as I drove to the hospital the next morning, a nagging doubt persisted. Vanessa never surrendered. She might retreat, regroup, adjust her strategy, but she never gave up on something she believed was rightfully hers. When I arrived at Dad's room, I was surprised to find Dr. Chen already there, reviewing charts with a worried expression. What's going on? I asked, setting down my bag. Dr. Chen glanced up. Mr. Mitchell had some concerning symptoms overnight. Increased confusion, elevated blood pressure. Dad waved dismissively from the bed. I'm fine. They're overreacting. But I could see he wasn't fine. His color was off, and there was a subtle slurring to his words that hadn't been there yesterday. "What happened?" I asked, moving to his side. "Nothing dramatic," Dr. Chen explained. The night nurse noted he seemed disoriented during her 2 a.m. check. By morning, his blood pressure was significantly elevated, and he was having difficulty with some basic cognitive tasks. Alarm bells rang in my mind. Could this affect the competency ruling? If his condition has deteriorated since signing the will changes? Dr. Chen shook his head. The documentation we compiled clearly shows his mental status at the time of signing. These new symptoms wouldn't retroactively impact that assessment. Yet the timing seemed suspicious. Could this be related to his medication? Any changes to his dosage? "We're looking into that now," Dr. Chen said. "His morning blood work showed some unusual results. We're running additional tests." Dad reached for my hand. "Stop worrying, Becca. Probably just a bad night's sleep." But his grip was weaker than usual, his words slightly slurred. Something was wrong. "I'd like to stay with him," I told Dr. Chen. "Cancel my meetings for the day." The doctor nodded. "That's probably wise. We should have more information soon." As Dr. Chen left, I pulled out my phone to update James and reschedule my appointments. Dad dozed fitfully beside me, occasionally mumbling in his sleep, something he'd never done before. Around 10 o'clock, a different doctor entered, Dr. Patel, the hospital's toxicologist. "Ms. Mitchell," she greeted me softly, mindful of Dad's sleep. "Could I speak with you outside?" In the hallway, her expression grave, Dr. Patel got straight to the point. "We found unusual levels of benzodiazepines in your father's bloodstream, specifically a drug called lorazepam. It's not something we've prescribed." My blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone may have given your father medication he shouldn't have received," she explained carefully. "The levels are high enough to explain his confusion and slurred speech, but not dangerously so." "How could this happen?" I demanded, anger building. "Don't you monitor what medications patients receive?" "We do," Dr. Patel assured me. "That's why this is concerning. There's no record of this medication being administered, which means it didn't come through proper channels." The implication was clear, and a terrible suspicion formed in my mind. "When did Diane last visit?" "I'd have to check the visitor logs," Dr. Patel said, "but I believe Mrs. Mitchell was here yesterday evening, after dinner. After Vanessa had withdrawn her legal challenge. After Dad had signed the papers. I need to make a call," I told Dr. Patel. "And then I think we need to contact hospital security." In the quiet hallway, hands shaking slightly, I called Alex. "Vanessa never intended to honor the withdrawal," I said the moment he answered. "She or Diane has been drugging Dad, trying to actually create the incompetence they claimed existed all along." "What?" Alex's voice sharpened. "Are you sure?" "The hospital found benzodiazepines in his system, medication he wasn't prescribed. It's causing confusion, slurred speech, exactly the symptoms they'd need to prove incompetence." Alex swore, under his breath. "I'm on my way. Don't confront them if they show up, and get hospital security involved immediately." By noon, a quiet investigation was underway. Security footage was being reviewed, visitor logs examined, and Dad was being carefully monitored, the unauthorized medication gradually clearing from his system. I sat beside his bed, watching him sleep, a mixture of rage and heartbreak swirling. Within me, how could they do this? How far would they go to get what they wanted? Dad stirred, his eyes opening. "Becca?" he murmured, his voice clearer than it had been earlier. "What time is it?" "Almost noon," I told him, forcing a smile. "How are you feeling?" He blinked, seeming to take inventory of himself. "Better. Head's clearer." He frowned slightly. Was I confused this morning? Everything seems hazy. I squeezed his hand. The doctors think you might have had a reaction to something. They're looking into it. Before I could decide whether to tell him our suspicions, a commotion in the hallway caught my attention. Raised voices, then the door swinging open to reveal Vanessa and Diane, both looking flustered as they were escorted by a security guard. "What is the meaning of this?" Diane demanded. "We're family. We have every right to visit Harold." The guard looked to me for direction. I stood, positioning myself between them and Dad's bed. "They can come in," I said quietly, "but I'd like you to stay, please." Vanessa's eyes narrowed at the unusual request. "What's going on, Rebecca? Why, the security escort?" "I think you know," I replied, keeping my voice level despite the anger coursing through me. "Dad had an interesting night. Confusion, slurred speech, cognitive difficulties, all appearing mysteriously after Diane's visit yesterday." Diane gasped, a hand flying to her chest. "Are you accusing me of something?" "The hospital found benzodiazepines in Dad's system," I continued, watching their faces carefully. "Medication he wasn't prescribed. Convenient timing, don't you think? Right after Vanessa withdraws her competency challenge." "This is outrageous!" Vanessa sputtered, though I noticed she glanced briefly, nervously at Diane. "You can't possibly think—" "The security footage is being reviewed as we speak," I interrupted. "Every visitor, every minute spent in this room. If either of you brought unauthorized medication in here, we'll know soon enough." Diane's face had drained of color. Vanessa's expression hardened into something cold and calculating, the face she probably showed opponents in the courtroom. "You've lost your mind," she said flatly. "Stress has made you paranoid. Dad's condition is deteriorating. Naturally. That's what happens with terminal cancer." "Not according to his doctors," I countered. "They're quite clear that his confusion today is medically inconsistent with his condition." From the bed, Dad's voice cut through the tension. "Stop." We all turned to him, surprised by the strength in his tone. He was struggling to sit up, and I moved to help him. "Dad, you should rest," I began, but he shook his head. "I need to understand what's happening," he insisted, his gaze moving between Vanessa, Diane, and me. "Rebecca, explain again what the doctors found." As clearly and calmly as I could, I explained the unauthorized medication, the timing, our suspicions. Dad listened silently, his expression growing more somber with each word. When I finished, he turned to Diane. "Did you do this?" The directness of his question seemed to shock her. "Harold, how can you ask me that? I would never." "Diane." His voice was quiet but firm. "The truth, please." Something in his tone broke through her protests. She stared at him for a long moment, then at Vanessa, who subtly shook her head. "It was just to help you sleep," Diane finally said, her voice small. "You've been so agitated lately with all this business drama. I thought—" "You thought drugging me would make me more compliant," Dad finished for her. "More easily influenced." Tears welled in Diane's eyes. "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," Dad said, his voice hollow with disappointment. "The question is whether you were acting alone." All eyes turned to Vanessa, who maintained her composed facade. "This is absurd. Any medication." Dad stared at Vanessa for a long moment, the silence in the room heavy with accusation. Finally, he sighed deeply. "I'd like to speak with Vanessa, alone." Diane started to protest, but a sharp look from Dad silenced her. The security guard escorted her into the hallway, and after a moment's hesitation, I followed, giving my sister and father the privacy he'd requested. In the hallway, Diane collapsed into a chair, her carefully constructed appearance crumbling. She looked suddenly older, the fine lines around her eyes more pronounced under the harsh hospital lighting. "I was just trying to help," she whispered, though whether to herself or to me wasn't clear. I leaned against the wall opposite her, arms crossed. "By drugging my father?" She glanced up, eyes narrow despite her tears. "You don't understand. Vanessa deserves that company. She's always been the one Harold groomed for leadership. And that justified drugging him? Potentially harming him?" "It was a tiny dose," she defended, straightening her spine. "Just enough to make him more reasonable. The stress of all this fighting isn't good for him." The casual way she admitted to it, as if administering unprescribed medication to a cancer patient was a reasonable action, stunned me into momentary silence. "Hospital security will be filing a report," I finally said, "and I'll be requesting that Dad's medical team evaluate whether charges should be pressed." Diane's face paled. "Charges? Rebecca, be reasonable. I'm your stepmother." "You're someone who endangered my father's health for your own agenda," I corrected coldly. "The fact that we're related makes it worse, not better." Before she could respond, Alex arrived, slightly breathless from rushing. "I came as soon as I could. What's the situation?" I pulled him aside, keeping my voice low as I briefed him on the latest developments. Diane's partial confession, Dad's request to speak with Vanessa alone, the hospital's ongoing investigation. "This changes everything," Alex murmured, running a hand through his hair. "If they were actively attempting to create symptoms of incompetence after the withdrawal was signed, it could constitute fraud, elder abuse." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," I cautioned, though the same thoughts had already crossed my mind. "Dad wanted to talk to Vanessa first. We need to respect that." Alex nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but I'm requesting copies of all security footage and medical reports, and I strongly suggest having a guard outside your father's room around the clock." After making the necessary arrangements with hospital administration, we waited in tense silence. Diane remained in her chair, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. I ignored her, focusing instead on the closed door, to Dad's room, wondering what was being said inside. Nearly 40 minutes passed before the door finally opened. Vanessa emerged, her expression unreadable as she approached us. "Dad wants to see all of you," she said simply, her voice carefully neutral. Inside, Dad looked exhausted but oddly at peace, sitting propped against his pillows. His gaze moved from Diane to Alex to me as we arranged ourselves around his bed. "Vanessa has told me everything," he began, his voice steady despite his obvious fatigue. "About the medication, about their plans to challenge the will again. All of it." I glanced at my sister, surprised by this apparent confession. Her face remained impassive, eyes fixed on Dad. "And what exactly did she tell you?" Alex asked cautiously. Dad sighed. "That after I signed the papers accepting her withdrawal of the competency challenge, Diane began administering small doses of her anti-anxiety medication to me. The goal was to create symptoms that could be documented, building a case for a second challenge, this time with actual medical evidence." Diane made a small sound of protest, but Dad silenced her with a raised hand. "Vanessa claims she wasn't directly involved in the medication plan, though she admits she was aware of it and didn't stop it." He looked at his eldest daughter, his expression a mix of disappointment and resignation. "She also acknowledges that she never intended to honor the withdrawal long term. It was merely a tactical retreat." The confirmation of my suspicions brought no satisfaction, only a weary sort of vindication. I'd known Vanessa wouldn't surrender so easily, known that her apparent cooperation had been too good to be true. "What happens now?" I asked. Dad's gaze shifted to Diane. "First, Diane will be leaving, both this hospital room and our home." My stepmother's eyes widened. "Harold, you can't mean—" "I've already contacted Rosenberg," Dad continued, referring to his personal attorney. "He'll be handling the separation agreement. After what you've done, you're fortunate I'm not pressing charges. The finality in his tone left no room for argument. Diane's lips trembled, but whatever protest she might have made died under Dad's unwavering stare. As for Vanessa, Dad continued, turning to my sister, we've reached our own understanding. Vanessa nodded slightly, her posture rigid. I'm withdrawing all claims to Mitchell Construction, permanently and unconditionally. I've already texted my legal team to formalize it. Alex shifted forward. Just like that? After everything? Not just like that, Dad corrected. In exchange for my agreement not to pursue legal action regarding the medication incident and for a revised inheritance structure that I believe is fair to everyone. I studied Vanessa's face, trying to read what lay behind her composed mask. This sudden capitulation still felt wrong, too convenient. What's the catch? I asked bluntly. A flicker of something, respect perhaps, crossed Vanessa's features. No catch. I'm returning to New York tonight. Mitchell Construction is yours, as is the Lakefront Commons project and everything that goes with it. I don't believe you, I said, the words escaping before I could consider their impact. Dad reached for my hand. It's real this time, Becca. Vanessa knows there's no path forward after what's happened today. Any further legal challenges would require explaining why hospital security found unauthorized medication in my system, and Diane's fingerprints, on the water glass that delivered it. The implication was clear. Vanessa was cutting her losses, accepting defeat to avoid potential criminal complications. I glanced at Alex, who gave me a subtle nod. From a legal perspective, the situation was checkmate. There's one more thing, Dad added, his grip on my hand tightening slightly. I've asked Dr. Chen to arrange for home hospice care. I'm leaving the hospital tomorrow. The sudden change of subject caught me off guard. Dad, after what just happened, I'm not spending my remaining time in a hospital room, he said firmly. I want to be in my own home, surrounded by my own things. But Diane, we'll be staying with her sister until the separation is finalized. The house will be yours, Becca. He smiled slightly. Well, technically it already is. I transferred the deed to you last week after we updated the will. This was news to me, and evidently to Vanessa as well, judging by the slight narrowing of her eyes. But she quickly composed herself, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt as she stood. I should go pack, she said briskly. My flight leaves at 7. Dad nodded. Goodbye, Vanessa. Despite everything, I do love you. Something flickered across my sister's face, a brief crack in her perfect facade, revealing a glimpse of genuine emotion. I know, Dad. Her voice was softer than I'd heard it in years. I love you too. With that, she turned and walked out, Diane trailing reluctantly behind her after a tearful farewell that Dad received with stoic politeness. Once they were gone, I turned to my father. Are you sure about this? The home hospice, I mean. He nodded, suddenly looking very tired. I'm sure. The doctors say it's a matter of weeks now, maybe a month if we're lucky. I'd rather spend that time in comfort. The casual way he discussed his remaining time hit me with fresh pain. Despite everything we'd been through, some part of me had been denying the inevitability of his death, focusing instead on the company succession drama. I'll make all the arrangements, I promised, swallowing past the lump in my throat. I know you will. He smiled, squeezing my hand. You always take care of everything, Becca. That's why you'll be a better CEO than I ever was. Alex tactfully excused himself, promising to return the next day with the final paperwork formalizing Vanessa's withdrawal. Alone with Dad, I pulled my chair closer to his bed. Did Vanessa tell you why? Why she was so determined to take the company if she never really wanted to run it? Dad was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. She said it was never about the company itself. It was about being the chosen one, about having tangible proof that she was special. Special? I echoed, not understanding. That's how she put it. Dad's fingers tapped thoughtfully against the blanket. Vanessa's felt like she had to be exceptional her entire life. Top of her class, youngest partner at her firm, perfect in every way. He sighed. That was my fault. I put too much pressure on her, expected too much perfection. I thought about my sister. Always immaculate, always achieving, always performing. How exhausting it must have been to maintain that facade year after year. So the company was just another trophy, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. More than that, Dad corrected gently. It was validation. Proof that all those years of striving were worth something, that she really was the favorite. His eyes met mine, regret evident in their depths. I never realized how damaging that dynamic was, for both of you. The admission stunned me into silence. After all these years of feeling second best, of wondering why I was never quite good enough for his full attention, to hear him acknowledge the harm he'd caused was both validating and painful. I made so many mistakes as a father, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. After your mother died, I was lost. I clung to Vanessa because she was so much like me, ambitious, driven. You reminded me too much of your mother. Thoughtful, steady, kind. It hurt to see her in you. You've already told me this, I said softly, but I didn't tell you the rest. He shifted, wincing slightly from the movement. I favored Vanessa because she was easier to love from a distance. She didn't need my daily attention, just my approval, my resources, my name. You needed a real father, present and engaged, and I didn't know how to be that without your mother beside me. Tears pricked at my eyes. So you chose the easier path. I did, he admitted simply. And in doing so, I failed you both in different ways. I turned Vanessa into someone who values achievement over integrity, and I deprived you of the recognition you deserved. The stark honesty of his self-assessment broke something open inside me. All the years of hurt, of feeling inadequate, of watching Vanessa receive the praise and attention I craved, it all came pouring out in silent tears. Dad reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he wiped a tear from my cheek. I can't undo the past, Becca, but I can try to make things right now. The next morning was a flurry of activity as we prepared for Dad's discharge. Alex arrived early with the promised paperwork, Vanessa's unconditional withdrawal of all claims to Mitchell Construction, notarized and filed with the court. She actually did it, I said, reviewing the documents with a lingering sense of disbelief. She did, Alex confirmed. I had my associate verify the filing this morning. It's official. You're the undisputed CEO of Mitchell Construction, effective immediately. Under different circumstances, this would have been a moment of triumph. Instead, it felt strangely hollow as I watched the hospice nurses prepare Dad for transport, explaining the equipment that would be installed in his home, the care protocols we would need to follow. James arrived around noon, having arranged for a company car to transport Dad home in comfort. Everything's ready at the house, he assured me. The hospital bed was delivered this morning, and the nursing service has set up all the necessary equipment. I nodded gratefully, too overwhelmed to form a proper response. The reality of what was happening, that we were bringing Dad home to die, was finally sinking in, overshadowing even the resolution of the company drama. You don't have to do this alone, James said gently, noticing my expression. The executive team has agreed to handle day-to-day operations for as long as necessary. Your job right now is to be with your father. I blinked back tears, touched by the understanding. Thank you, James. The journey home was mercifully brief. Dad remained alert throughout, gazing out the window at the familiar streets of Lakeside, with a kind of wistful fondness. Spring's coming early this year, he observed as we passed the lakefront park where he'd taught me to ride a bike decades ago. The crocuses are already blooming. I followed his gaze, noticing for the first time the small purple and yellow flowers pushing through the thawing ground. They're beautiful. Your mother loved crocuses, he said softly. Said they were brave little things, fighting through the cold earth to reach the sun. The casual reference to my mother, rare in our household after her death, caught me by surprise. I remember, I said. She used to plant them all along the front walk. Dad nodded, his eyes distant with memory. She did so many things I never properly appreciated until she was gone. When we arrived at the house, I was struck by how different it felt. Diane's presence had always dominated the space, her expensive artwork on the walls, her pristine white furniture that no one was allowed to sit on, her insistence on a formal, showroom-like atmosphere. But today, the house felt warmer, more welcoming. Someone, probably James or Olivia, had filled the entryway with vases of fresh flowers. The sterile white couch had been replaced with a comfortable-looking sectional, and family photos that Diane had relegated to storage were back on display. "You've been busy," Dad remarked, as the nurses settled him into the hospital bed that now occupied what had been the formal dining room, positioned to offer a view of the backyard gardens. "Not me," I admitted. "I've been at the hospital with you." Dad smiled. "You have good friends, Becca. Better than I deserved." Throughout the afternoon, a steady stream of visitors arrived. Colleagues from Mitchell Construction bringing food and well wishes, neighbors offering help, even Uncle Peter, who had driven in from Grand Rapids as soon as he heard about Dad's move home. "Quite the homecoming," Uncle Peter observed as he and I shared coffee in the kitchen while Dad napped. "Harold's made a lot of friends over the years." "He built half the town," I said with a small smile. "Hard not to know people when your name is on so many buildings." Uncle Peter studied me over the rim of his mug. "How are you holding up? With everything? The company, Vanessa, Diane, all of it?" I considered the question, realizing I hadn't had a moment to properly assess my own feelings amid the chaos. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "It all happened so fast." "That tends to be how life-changing moments work," he said wisely. "No warning, no preparation. Just suddenly you're in the middle of a storm, trying to stay upright." "That's exactly it," I agreed, grateful for his understanding. One minute I'm accepting that Vanessa will get the company, the next I'm CEO and planning Dad's end-of-life care. Uncle Peter reached across the counter to pat my hand. "You're stronger than you know, Rebecca. Always have been. Even as a little girl, you had this quiet resilience about you." His words reminded me of what Dad had said, that I was like my mother. Steady, reliable, kind. I'd always interpreted that as boring, predictable, unexceptional. But perhaps those qualities had their own kind of strength. "Has anyone heard from Vanessa or Diane?" Uncle Peter asked, changing the subject. I shook my head. "Vanessa's back in New York. Diane's staying with her sister in Chicago until—" I trailed off, not wanting to say, "until Dad dies." "Until arrangements are finalized," Uncle Peter supplied tactfully. "Well, good riddance to both of them, if you ask me. Never did understand what Harold saw in either one." The blunt assessment startled a laugh out of me. "Uncle Peter?" He shrugged unapologetically. "Just being honest. Diane was always more interested in what Harold could provide than who he was. And Vanessa, well, she's been riding on her father's coattails her entire life, taking credit for his generosity and connections. Though his characterization was harsh, I couldn't entirely disagree. "They're still family," I said half-heartedly. "Family is as family does," he countered. "You're the only one who's shown real loyalty to Harold. The rest is just blood and paperwork." Before I could respond, a hospice nurse appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Mitchell, your father's awake and asking for you." I found Dad looking surprisingly alert, propped up against his pillows with a tablet in his hands. "Working already?" I teased, sitting in the chair beside his bed. He smiled ruefully. "Old habits. I was just checking in on Lakefront Commons. The foundation work is progressing ahead of schedule." "James mentioned that," I said, pleased to see his continued interest in the project. "The revised environmental assessment came back clean, so we're cleared for the next phase." "Good, good." He set the tablet aside. "I want to see it completed, Becca, or at least far enough along that I know it will be done right." The unspoken "before I die" hung in the air between us. "You will," I promised, though we both knew it was unlikely. Construction projects of this scale took years, not weeks. Dad seemed to read my thoughts. "Even if I don't, I'll see it through your eyes." That's enough. The simple statement caught me off guard, and I had to look away to compose myself. When I turned back, Dad was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "What?" I asked. "I was just thinking about time," he said thoughtfully. "How we always think we have more of it than we do. All the things I meant to say to you over the years but never found the right moment." "You can say them now," I offered. He nodded slowly. "I can try." He reached for my hand. "Starting with this. I'm proud of you, Rebecca. Not just for what you've accomplished at the company, but for who you are as a person. You have integrity, compassion, and strength, qualities I sometimes lost sight of in my focus on ambition and success." The words I'd waited a lifetime to hear brought fresh tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Dad." "There's something else," he continued, his expression turning more serious. "Something I should have told you years ago, about your mother's death." I froze, uncertain what revelation could be coming. Mom's death had always been presented as straightforward, a car accident on an icy road, instant and unavoidable. "What about it?" I asked cautiously. Dad's grip on my hand tightened. "The night she died, we'd had an argument. About Vanessa, actually. Your mother felt I was putting too much pressure on her, setting impossible standards." This was news to me. In my childhood memories, my parents rarely argued about anything. "She left the house upset," Dad continued, his voice rougher now. "If we hadn't been fighting, she wouldn't have been on that road at that time." Understanding dawned. "Dad, you can't blame yourself for an accident." "I've carried that guilt for 17 years, he admitted quietly. "Not just for the argument, but for how I handled everything afterward. Instead of being present for you girls, I retreated into work. Instead of honoring your mother's concerns about how I was raising Vanessa, I doubled down on pushing her toward achievement. I thought about how our family had changed after Mom died. Dad becoming more distant, Vanessa more driven, me more invisible. Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm finally trying to make things right," he said simply. "And that starts with the truth. Your mother was right about everything. About Vanessa needing less pressure, about you needing more attention, about what truly matters in life." He sighed deeply, the effort of the conversation clearly taxing his limited energy. I realized too late that success isn't measured in buildings constructed or deals closed. It's measured in the lives you touch, the people you raise, the love you give. As I absorbed his words, the doorbell rang, followed by the sound of voices in the entryway. After a moment, Uncle Peter appeared in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but there's someone here to see Harold. Says it's important." Dad frowned slightly. "Who is it?" Uncle Peter hesitated, then stepped aside to reveal a woman I didn't recognize. Mid-60s, perhaps, elegantly dressed, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Hello, Harold," she said, her voice carrying a hint of nervousness. "It's been a long time. Dad's reaction was immediate and shocking. All color drained from his face, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Margaret?" he whispered, the name barely audible. The woman, Margaret apparently, stepped further into the room, her gaze never leaving Dad's face. "I heard about your illness. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner." I looked between them, confused by the intensity of their exchange. "Dad? Who is this?" Dad seemed to remember my presence with a start. "Rebecca," he said, his voice unsteady. "This is Margaret Wilson, James's wife, and my former business partner." The name meant nothing to me. In all the years I'd known James, his wife had never been involved with Mitchell Construction. "Former business partner?" I echoed, bewildered. Margaret smiled gently. "It was a very long time ago, before you were born." Dad's expression had settled into something between shock and resignation. Margaret was one of the original founders of Mitchell Construction. We started the company together, back when women in construction were even rarer than they are now. This revelation stunned me. In all the company history I knew, all the stories Dad had told, there had never been any mention of a female co-founder. "What happened?" I asked, looking between them. Margaret glanced at Dad, clearly waiting for him to answer. When he remained silent, she sighed softly. "Life happened," she said diplomatically. "Different visions for the company, personal complications. I sold my stake to Harold 30 years ago and moved to Seattle to start over." The careful way she phrased it suggested there was much more to the story. Dad confirmed this by saying, "Margaret is being kind. The truth is, I pushed her out when she opposed my expansion plans. I was young, ambitious, and convinced I knew better." "And did you?" I asked. "Know better?" Dad shook his head ruefully. "Her vision was actually more aligned with what Mitchell Construction eventually became, focused on community development, sustainability, the kinds of projects that improve people's lives. I was more interested in commercial development, high-profile buildings with my name on them." "It worked out for both of us," Margaret interjected graciously. "I built a successful firm in Seattle, and Harold created something remarkable here." Uncle Peter, who had been watching this exchange with visible fascination, cleared his throat. "I'll leave you folks to catch up," he said, retreating from the doorway. When he was gone, Margaret moved closer to Dad's bed. "James told me about what happened with Vanessa and the company, that your younger daughter is taking over now." Dad nodded, reaching for my hand. "Rebecca. She's been the heart of Mitchell Construction for years, though I was too blind to see it." Margaret turned her kind gaze on me. "James speaks very highly of you, says you have a natural instinct for the work, especially the community-focused projects." "Thank you," I said, still trying to process this unexpected appearance and the revelations it brought. "How long are you in town?" "Just a few days. I'm staying with James and Patricia." She hesitated, then addressed Dad directly. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me, Harold. We didn't exactly part on the best terms." Dad's expression softened. "That was my fault, not yours. I'm glad you came, Margaret. There are amends I should have made long ago." Understanding that they needed privacy for this conversation, I stood. "I'll let you two talk. Can I get you anything before I go? Tea? Coffee?" Margaret declined politely, and Dad asked for water. As I left the room, I heard him say, "You were right, you know. About the company, about how I was running it. I realized it too late." In the kitchen, I found Uncle Peter making sandwiches. "Figured people would need to eat eventually," he explained, slicing a tomato with surprising deftness. "Thanks." I leaned against the counter, processing the unexpected encounter. "Did you know about Margaret? That she co-founded the company with Dad?" Uncle Peter nodded. "I knew. It was before your time, and Harold preferred not to discuss it. Wasn't his proudest moment, how that partnership ended." Why didn't he ever mention her? In all the company history, all the stories. Guilt? Probably, Uncle Peter said matter-of-factly. Margaret was brilliant, had vision when Harold just had ambition, but she was also principled. Wouldn't compromise on certain things, like environmental impact, worker conditions. Harold saw those principles as obstacles to growth. So he pushed her out, I finished. Bought her out, technically, though the terms weren't particularly fair, Uncle Peter corrected. Ironic thing is, about 10 years later, Harold started shifting the company toward exactly the kind of projects Margaret had advocated for. Community spaces, affordable housing, sustainable design. Never admitted she'd been right all along, of course. This new perspective on my father, on the company I was now leading, left me feeling slightly disoriented. How much of what I thought I knew was shaped by selective storytelling, by omissions, and revisions? Uncle Peter, I said carefully, was Dad always fair? In business, I mean. He considered the question, his knife pausing mid-slice. Harold was a man of his generation, he said finally. He played by the rules as they existed, not always as they should have been. Was he fair? By the standards of his time, usually. By today's standards? Probably not always. It wasn't quite the answer I was looking for, but perhaps it was the most honest one possible. Dad, like all of us, was complicated, capable of both tremendous vision and disappointing blindness, of both generosity and selfishness. He's trying to make things right now, I said, more to myself than to Uncle Peter. With me, with Vanessa in his own way, and now with Margaret. End-of-life clarity, Uncle Peter observed. When the final accounting comes due, people often see with new eyes what truly matters. We worked together to prepare a light dinner, setting out plates in the sunroom adjacent to Dad's makeshift bedroom. Margaret stayed for the meal, sharing stories about the early days of Mitchell construction that filled in gaps I hadn't even known existed in my understanding of the company. Harold was fearless, she recalled, a fond smile softening her features. When banks wouldn't lend to us, he'd find creative financing. When suppliers doubted we could deliver, he'd charm them into giving us a chance. And Margaret was the conscience, Dad added from his bed, where he'd insisted on joining the conversation. She'd remind me why we started the company in the first place, not just to build buildings, but to build communities. As I listened to them reminisce, occasionally prompted by questions from Uncle Peter or James, who had joined us for dinner, I began to see Mitchell Construction in a new light, not just as my father's legacy, but as something more complex, a company shaped by multiple visions, multiple influences, evolving over decades. After dinner, as Margaret prepared to leave, she took me aside. Your father showed me the plans. For Lakefront Commons, she said. It's an impressive project. Exactly the kind of development I envisioned all those years ago. Community-focused, environmentally conscious, accessible to people of different income levels. Thank you, I said. It's Dad's vision, really. She smiled knowingly. James tells me you've been the driving force behind many of its most innovative elements. The affordable housing component was your idea, wasn't it? And the sustainable energy systems? I nodded, surprised that James had given me credit for those contributions. You should be proud, Margaret continued. Leading a company like Mitchell Construction is about more than profit margins and impressive architecture. It's about shaping the community where people live, work, and build their lives. As she spoke, I felt a new sense of purpose settling over me. Taking over Mitchell Construction wasn't just about proving myself to Dad or outmaneuvering Vanessa. It was about honoring a legacy bigger than any one person. A legacy that, I was beginning to realize, aligned more closely with my own values than I'd previously understood. I'd love to hear more about your work in Seattle, I told her. Perhaps before you leave town? Margaret's eyes lit up. I'd like that very much. After she left, I returned to Dad's room to find him looking exhausted, but oddly at peace. "She hasn't changed," he said softly. "Still principled, still visionary." "Why didn't you ever tell me about her?" I asked, helping him adjust his pillows. He sighed. "Pride, I suppose. And shame. I didn't behave well when our partnership ended. It's not a chapter of my life I'm proud of." "But you built something remarkable together," I pointed out. "That part of the story matters too." Dad nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. There are many chapters of Mitchell Construction's history. You should know, the good and the bad. If I have time, I'll share them with you." The "if" hung heavily between us. We both knew his time was limited, measured now in weeks, perhaps even days. "I'd like that," I said simply. As night fell and the hospice nurse returned for Dad's evening care, I retreated to my old bedroom, now converted to a home office. Sitting at the desk, I opened my laptop and pulled up the Lakefront Commons plans, seeing them with fresh eyes after my conversation with Margaret. The project truly was a culmination of everything Mitchell Construction had evolved to become. A blend of commercial success and community benefit, of ambitious vision and principled execution. In a way, it represented a reconciliation of the competing philosophies that had once divided Dad and Margaret. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "How's everything going? Need anything?" I considered the question, realizing that for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sort of calm. Not happiness exactly. Dad was still dying, Vanessa was still estranged, the weight of running Mitchell Construction still loomed large, but perhaps acceptance of all of it. "We're okay," I texted back. Dad had an unexpected visitor. "Today, Margaret Wilson. Ever heard of her?" Alex's response came quickly. "James's wife? The architect from Seattle? I've heard James mention her but never met her. Turns out she co-founded Mitchell Construction with Dad. Long story, I'll fill you in tomorrow." After setting my phone aside, I returned to the Lakefront Commons, plans, making notes for improvements, extensions of the community elements, ways to further honor both Dad's vision and Margaret's principles. It was nearly midnight when I finally closed my laptop, exhausted but somehow lighter. As I prepared for bed, I glanced out the window at the clear spring night, stars visible despite the city lights. Something Margaret had said during dinner came back to me. "Buildings outlast us all. Make sure what you build reflects the best of who you are." I wondered what the best of Mitchell Construction might look like under my leadership. Not just Dad's legacy, not just Margaret's influence, but my own vision, shaped by both, yet distinct. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I found myself looking forward to the future of the company, not just defending it from Vanessa's schemes. There was real work to be done, a legacy to both honor and transform. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges: Dad's declining health, the formal transition of power at the company, the countless decisions large and small that awaited me. But tonight, at least, I could rest knowing that Mitchell Construction would continue, perhaps stronger and more purposeful than ever. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself thinking not of Vanessa's defeat or my own victory, but of the crocuses Dad had pointed out on our drive home. Brave little things, pushing through, the cold earth toward the sun. The morning of the will reading arrived with a soft spring rain tapping against the windows. It had been 3 weeks since Dad passed away, 3 weeks of arrangements, condolences, and a strange, hollow quiet that seemed to fill every corner of the house. I stood in front of my closet, trying to decide what to wear. What was the appropriate outfit for hearing your father's final wishes formally declared? The black dress from the funeral felt too somber, my usual work attire too casual. I finally settled on a simple navy suit, professional but not cold, formal but not severe. As I fastened my mother's pearl earrings, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked tired, the past few months etched into fine lines around my eyes that hadn't been there before. But there was something else, too. A steadiness. A certainty that hadn't been present 6 months ago. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "Meeting you at the office. Everything ready." The will reading would take place at Golden Oaks Law Offices, where Dad's personal attorney, Richard Rosenberg, would handle the proceedings. We'd chosen a neutral location deliberately. The family home felt too intimate, the Mitchell construction headquarters too contentious given the circumstances. I arrived early, greeted warmly by the receptionist who showed me to the conference room. Alex was already there, reviewing documents with Richard. "Rebecca." Richard stood to embrace me. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," I said, surprised, to find it mostly true. The raw grief had begun to settle into something more manageable, a persistent ache rather than the sharp, breathtaking pain of those first days. "Have you heard from Vanessa?" he asked, arranging folders at the head of the table. I shook my head. Not directly. Her assistant sent flowers for the funeral, but Vanessa stayed in New York. The memory still stung. My sister's absence at our father's memorial service explained away with a vague reference to unavoidable professional commitments. And Diane? She came to the service but left immediately after. We haven't spoken since. Richard nodded, unsurprised. Well, they're both expected today. Diane confirmed yesterday, and Vanessa's flight arrived last night. The prospect of seeing them both after everything that had happened sent a flutter of anxiety through my stomach. Despite the clear legal resolution of the company succession, I couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa might have one final move planned. As if summoned by my thoughts, the conference room door opened and Diane stepped in. She looked diminished, somehow her designer clothes hanging slightly looser on her frame, her usually perfect makeup unable to fully conceal the shadows beneath her eyes. "Rebecca," she greeted me with cool formality. "Diane," I replied, maintaining the same distance. Whatever our relationship had been before, never warm but at least civil, it had been irreparably damaged by her actions in Dad's hospital room. She took a seat at the far end of the table, setting her purse primly before her. An uncomfortable silence descended, broken only when the door opened again to admit Uncle Peter and James. "Sorry we're late," Uncle Peter announced, shaking hands with Richard. "Parking downtown is a nightmare these days." James gave me a supportive nod as he took the seat beside me. "Everything okay?" he murmured. "As okay as it can be," I replied quietly. We waited another 15 minutes, the tension in the room building as the hands of the clock moved steadily forward. Just as Richard was about to suggest we begin without her, the door swung open a final time. Vanessa stood in the doorway, as impeccably put together as ever in a tailored charcoal suit, her dark hair swept into a sleek chignon. Only someone who knew her well would notice the slight tightness around her eyes, the barely perceptible tension in her shoulders. "Sorry I'm late," she said smoothly, taking the empty seat across from me. Traffic from the airport was heavier than expected. Her gaze met mine briefly, revealing nothing. No grief, no anger, no remorse. Just the carefully constructed mask she'd perfected over years of courtroom appearances. "Now that everyone's here," Richard began, opening the formal leather portfolio before him, "we can proceed with the reading of Harold Mitchell's last will and testament." The legal preamble washed over me in familiar phrases. "Being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." I found myself studying the faces around the table instead. Diane sat rigidly, her fingers laced tightly together. Uncle Peter leaned back in his chair, expression somber but composed. James listened attentively, occasionally making notes on a small pad. And Vanessa. Vanessa watched Richard with the focused intensity of a predator tracking potential prey, missing nothing. "As you all know," Richard continued, Harold made significant changes to his estate plan in the months before his passing. The majority of these changes concerned Mitchell Construction, which has already been formally transferred to Rebecca's leadership. Vanessa's expression didn't flicker, though her knuckles whitened slightly as she clasped her hands on the table. However, there are other assets to be distributed, as well as personal messages Harold wished to convey to each of you. Richard withdrew several sealed envelopes from his portfolio. Harold asked that these be read today, in the presence of all parties. He selected the first envelope, opening it carefully. "To my brother, Peter Mitchell," he read, "your steadfast support has been a constant in my life, particularly during these difficult final months. While we sometimes disagreed on business matters, your loyalty to our family never wavered." Uncle Peter blinked rapidly, clearly moved by the acknowledgement. "I leave to you my cabin at Blue Lake, where we spent so many summers fishing and arguing about politics. May it bring you peace in the years to come." A small smile touched Uncle Peter's lips. The cabin had been a source of friendly competition between the brothers for years, each claiming to have caught the bigger fish from its weathered dock. "To James Wilson," Richard continued, opening the second envelope, "my trusted partner and friend, you stood by me when others would have walked away, and you helped build Mitchell Construction into what it is today. Your partnership has been one of the greatest privileges of my career." James nodded, his expression solemn. "In addition to your existing ownership stake, I leave you my collection of architectural drawings and blueprints from our earliest projects. No one would appreciate them more than you. And please, tell Margaret I finally admitted she was right about those sustainability initiatives back in '89. A ripple of surprise passed through the room at the mention of Margaret. James smiled, a private understanding in his eyes. "To my wife, Diane," Richard read from the third envelope, his tone carefully neutral. Diane straightened, her face a carefully composed mask. "Our years together brought both joy and pain. While the end of our marriage came under difficult circumstances, I choose to remember the good times we shared. As agreed in our separation documents, you will retain ownership of the vacation home in Naples and receive the financial settlement arranged by our respective attorneys." The clinical nature of the bequest reflected the state of their relationship. At the end, fractured beyond repair by her betrayal, reduced to legal terminology and financial arrangements, Diane's expression remained unchanged, though a slight tremor in her hand as she reached for her water glass betrayed her emotions. "To my daughter Vanessa," Richard continued, selecting the fourth envelope. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Despite the legal resolutions of recent months, this was the moment that truly mattered. Dad's final message to his firstborn. "From the day you arrived, you amazed me with your brilliance and determination. I pushed you to excel, to achieve, to be exceptional in everything you attempted, perhaps too hard, as your mother often suggested." Vanessa's perfect composure wavered slightly, a flash of vulnerability crossing her features before she could master it. "While Mitchell Construction will not be your legacy as once planned, I have established the Harold Mitchell Foundation for Educational Excellence with an initial endowment of $10 million. You will serve as chairperson of this foundation, guiding its mission to provide scholarships to deserving students who demonstrate academic promise and leadership potential." A soft gasp escaped her, quickly suppressed. The foundation was substantial, not the company she'd expected to inherit, but a significant responsibility and trust nonetheless. "Additionally, I leave you my minority stake in Lakeside Development, partners, and my collection of rare first editions, which you admired since childhood. My hope is that you will find fulfillment in New York, pursuing your own path rather than the one I prescribed for you." Richard paused, then continued in a softer voice. "I am proud of you, Vanessa, not for your achievements, but for who you are. I'm sorry I didn't make that distinction clearer during my life." Vanessa's eyes shone with unshed tears, For a moment, the perfect facade cracked, revealing the wounded daughter beneath the polished attorney exterior. And finally, Richard said, opening the last envelope, to my daughter, Rebecca. I braced myself, aware of all eyes turning toward me. You were right beside me during the darkest days, not for recognition or reward, but because that's who you are, steadfast, compassionate, loyal to your core. In you, I see your mother's best qualities alongside strengths entirely your own. The mention of my mother brought a lump to my throat. While Mitchell Construction is already legally yours, today I want to acknowledge that it has been yours, in spirit for years. You understood what the company truly stands for long before I did. Your leadership will take it places I never could have imagined. The words washed over me. Validation, yes, but something more precious. Understanding. Dad had seen me, truly seen me, in those final months. I also leave you the family home and its contents, with the exception of specific items designated elsewhere in this will. And in the small safe, in my office, you'll find your mother's journals. She would have wanted you to have them. My mother's journals? I hadn't even known they existed. The thought of reading her words, connecting with her thoughts after all these years, left me momentarily speechless. There is one final bequest, Richard continued, directed to both my daughters jointly. Vanessa and I exchanged surprised glances across the table. In the bank vault at Lakeside Trust is a collection of family photographs, letters, and mementos that tell the story of our family, both the moments of pride and the moments of failure. I ask that you review these together, as sisters rather, than adversaries. The request hung in the air between us, challenging and hopeful. The Mitchell legacy belongs to both of you, in different ways. My hope is that you will find a way forward that honors the past while creating your own futures. Richard folded the letter carefully. That concludes the formal bequests. There are additional details regarding tax implications and trust structures that we can discuss individually with each beneficiary. As the meeting dissolved into practical conversations about paperwork and signatures, I found myself watching Vanessa. She sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable as she absorbed everything that had just been revealed. When our eyes met across the table, I saw something unexpected, not the calculation or resentment I'd anticipated, but uncertainty, vulnerability, perhaps even a flicker of regret. After the necessary documents were signed, we filed out of the conference room into the reception area. Uncle Peter and James departed first, followed by Diane, who left without speaking to either Vanessa or me. And then it was just the two of us, standing awkwardly in the elegant lobby, years of competition and hurt stretching between us like an unbridgeable chasm. "Congratulations," Vanessa said finally, her voice cool but not hostile. "Dad made the right choice with the company." The admission, so unexpected, so unlike her, momentarily stunned me into silence. "The foundation is a significant responsibility," I replied when I found my voice. "He knew you'd excel at it." She nodded, adjusting the strap of her designer handbag. "I fly back tonight. There's a case waiting for me." Of course. The familiar pattern reasserted itself. Vanessa leaving, always leaving, never staying long enough for anything real to develop between us. An uncomfortable silence fell. We were strangers who shared blood and history, bound together by a father whose love had shaped us in profoundly different ways. "About Dad's request," I began hesitantly. "The family mementos at the bank." "I don't know when I'll be back in Michigan," she said quickly, the automatic deflection so familiar it was almost comforting in its predictability. "They'll keep," I said, not pushing. "Whenever you're ready." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that I wasn't insisting or demanding as Dad might have done. "Maybe over the holidays," she conceded, a small olive branch. "Maybe." I smiled slightly, acknowledging the gesture for what it was. Not a promise, but a possibility. As we stepped outside into the spring sunshine, I was struck by how differently we'd emerged from the same childhood. Vanessa, brilliant but restless, forever chasing approval through achievement. Me, steadfast but overlooked, finding purpose in the work itself rather than the recognition it brought. "Take care of yourself, Rebecca," Vanessa said, extending her hand in a formal goodbye. I looked at her outstretched hand, then back at her face, my sister's face, with our mother's eyes and our father's determined chin. Instead of shaking her hand, I stepped forward and hugged her. She stiffened momentarily, then awkwardly patted my back before stepping away. "You too, Vanessa," I said softly. "The company isn't the only part of Dad's legacy worth preserving." She nodded once, a complex emotion crossing her features too quickly to interpret, then turned and walked toward the waiting taxi. I watched her go, feeling neither victory nor vindication. Just a quiet certainty that Dad's final lesson was his. Most important, legacy isn't about buildings constructed or fortunes amassed. It's about the lives we touch, the relationships we nurture, the wounds we heal before it's too late. As I walked to my car, I thought about the work awaiting me. Not just at Mitchell Construction, but in understanding my father's complex life through the mementos he'd left behind. In reading my mother's journals, hearing her voice again after so many years of silence, in possibly, someday, rebuilding some kind of relationship with my sister. The favorite child, the golden daughter, those labels seemed suddenly childish, reductive. We had both been loved, both been damaged, both been shaped by a father who did his imperfect best. And now we would both move forward, carrying different pieces of his legacy into futures of our own making. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.